Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So this week's Torah portion. Anybody? Hit.
I don't know how to say it. Vayechi.
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 Huh?
Monty says it Vayechi.
Vayechi?
That's what Monty said. I was like, that's not right. He laughed.
My hearing is a little off too.
Werewolf.
Jewish
werewolf. That's the first book of Google.
Oh, Jewish werewolf. Well, that's weird. Okay, so of course that's the Hebrew word for the first few words of the Torah portion, which stands for
He lived. So that Kai is live, right? Or life. Kai.
Yeah.
So that's I don't know why it's not Kai. He.
Yeah. So he meaning life.
He.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course this is representation of and so this gives you the male support there. So and he lived. And of course it starts out, and again we have in this Torah portion 2 deaths. And he lived, and we have 2 deaths. But it's kind of interesting when you think about that, because first off, well, we're going to get into that. There's a phrase that we've used before, and that phrase is called draw near. Draw near. So when you think about that phrase, draw near, we've studied out draw near. So all these different Torah portions over all these different years, all these different cycles, draw near. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Oh, come on. It's in Leviticus. It's like the center of all the Torah. What is the purpose of the sacrifices, the offerings? The purpose is to draw near. It's not to. Is that what you said?
No.
What did you say?
It was to me.
Oh, okay.
Private.
Okay. All right. So to draw near is always to draw near to Yah, correct? And so in this Torah portion, we're going to get into that and talk about this whole element of drawing near is seen in another light. So as we draw near, because our goal is to always, ultimately, in this life, while we're in the land of the living, of this realm, so to speak, is that we want to draw near to Yahweh. But what about in the world to come? The world to come. We also want to be qualified to draw near, because death in itself is a separation from this world. But do we want our life in the world to come to be separated from the Most High? So there's a thought process. We're going to talk about a little bit of that Hebrew thought process and what that means. And then in this Torah portion, there's some other things. It's very interesting because he talks a lot about not just the world to come, but the future to come. So we have a realm of some things that are happening in that present of Jacob, which is very cyclical. So the things that are going on with him will happen to the fathers. What happens to the fathers happens to the sons. And that principle is seen. And then we also see at the very middle of all of that is, and he lived. And so the purpose of it is also to show that there is more to life. And not just to draw to a close, but to draw near, of course. All right, so also in this Torah portion, we have the blessings that are spoken over the 12 sons, and also the sons of Joseph, because the 2 sons of Joseph are adopted by Jacob, by Israel, and I think that's rather significant. And sometimes, have you ever read through the different blessings and then looked at it? It's like, well, that sure doesn't seem like a blessing, does it?
Some of them don't.
Right? And you think, but could they all be blessings? And hopefully we'll be able to get into that discussion as well, because could it be a blessing in disguise? right? A blessing in disguise. What seems to be like a curse is actually a blessing in disguise. So what message is actually really being spoken to these sons that doesn't seem like on the surface as a blessing? It seems more like a curse, but it is a blessing. All right. Let's go ahead and open this up then in Genesis chapter 47, beginning with verse 28. And let's begin, and if I can get somebody to read, go ahead and read 28 through the end of that chapter. If someone would do that. Want to, Joy? Thanks.
Sure. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And thus Yaakov lived to be 147 years old. The time came when Israel was approaching death. So he called his sons Joseph and said to him, if you truly love me, please put your hand under my thigh and pledge that out of consideration for me, you will not bury me in Egypt. Rather, when I sleep with my fathers, you are to carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. He replied, I will do as you have said. He said, swear to me, and he swore to him. Then Israel bowed down his head at the head of his bed.
Okay, so we got a couple different things that are going on there. One of the first things is who's bowing down to worship?
Israel, I think. Israel bowed down.
Israel bowed down.
At the head of his bed.
What does that tell you? So whose bed, or who is he bowing down to?
Say Yahweh. Yehovah.
There's something going on. Just think about it. Like if you're reading a script on a screenplay, and you're reading the script, you're reading Shakespeare, and you see somebody that's bowing down right there in the middle, and that's what his action is. And who's he with?
That was Joseph.
Joseph. So what we have here is the conclusion or the fulfillment of the second dream. Remember, Joseph had a dream that all the sheaves would bow down to him. Well, we saw that in last week's Torah portion. And then in this week's Torah portion, what do we see? Israel bowing down to Joseph. Now, so it's a fulfillment of that dream. Now it says bed. Isn't it? It's very interesting. Joseph. What was Joseph's blessing? What was his blessing? Remember the double portion that he would receive, the blessing of the double portion? In other words, he would be given that responsibility to take care of all of his family. Is that you get the extra amount so that you make sure that all of the inheritance, all of your family is taken care of. The affairs are taken care of. The mortgages are taken care of. The bills are taken care of. Everybody's taken care of. The double portion is there, so you can administrate continuous protection and looking out over your family. That's why whenever we see in the scriptures over in the Proverbs where it says we are to leave an inheritance to our children's children. Well, if we failed in that responsibility in taking care of our children, then we're not fulfilling the purposes by which Yah has called us. And and the challenge of this today, when I think about this, is that the governmental powers and that in the society, the culture that we live in, does everything it can to remove our ability to save up a blessing for our children and our children's children, doesn't it? So it's a satanic work that's really working against God's people. And, unless for those very few that somehow have been able to break through the matrix and they have a huge blessing. But for the common person, well, Israel is full of common persons. When you think about Daniel, Daniel didn't have any kids. Remember Daniel, the prophet Daniel? Why didn't Daniel have any kids?
He was a eunuch.
He was a eunuch. Yeah. So when he was taken to captivity and brought into the royal palace, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The only way a male can live in the royal palace is to be castrated. And why? Because the harem's in the royal palace. And they don't want anybody messing with the women over there or the women's children. So it's very important. So Daniel was not able to have children. So he became very wealthy. He was second in charge of the kingdom of Babylon.
It's just as Joseph.
Just like Joseph. Now, Joseph, we know, had children. So that's a difference. But
Daniel forwarded his children to the 3 wise men.
You mean the blessing?
the blessing.
To take
Yeah.
Israel.
So he had a huge inheritance. Well, who's he going to give the inheritance to?
The Messiah.
To the Messiah. Because he was given such a tremendous download. And I was actually hit a couple of those points that the downloads were so powerful it literally zapped the life out of him. I was talking about that in this week's Walking in Spirit Truth as we're going through for Ezra. The power of a vision from God. One, to be called worthy enough to have a vision that speaks about the future. Drains one's ability to function for a while. So think about all the different people that had these encounters. John in Revelation, when he had an encounter with these angels that were speaking to him and telling him about these visions, and then he had to be re-strengthened. Who else? Jeremiah. Was it Jeremiah or Ezekiel? Probably both. That they came across this encounter with a vision and that put them into a state that literally weakened them. And then they were given, like Jeremiah was given a scroll to eat, where he was strengthened, but he was also bitter in his mouth. I think John had the same thing. I don't want to be crossing things because of my brain. It's not quite functioning right now. Thank you, Father, for a good functioning brain.
Words of your mouth.
Thank you, Father, for a good functioning brain. But Ezra is in that same boat. Just literally, it was weakened by the vision. But to be counted worthy, to be taken into a realm of seeing things, how would you like to be in that place? To be counted worthy. So, I guess nobody wants to be there. I don't get any feedback on that. But I want, no, seriously, to be brought into that.
It's a big responsibility. I'm not sure that I would, that's probably why I don't have them. I'm just saying.
So,
It'd be hard. And then can I say something else?
Yeah.
You're talking about inheritance, but, I don't think we should forget about that an inheritance, I guess, is monetary. I mean, it obviously was. But what about the inheritance of carrying the torch for Torah? I didn't start my kids out on that, but they know what I do. They do not serve me pork.
Yeah.
In fact, they don't even have it usually when I'm there. They go out of their way to find something else for us to eat besides pork. So I think that inheritance can also be, because Jacob was strong. He was a strong guy. I mean, he went through a lot of things in his life, and he was strong. And I think that he passed that down. I mean, Joseph had to have been strong to do what he did, and each patriarch passed down their strengths, whatever they were, to these kids. So an inheritance to me is not always just monetary.
That's right.
I think it can be spiritual or whatever you want to say. So,
no, that's an excellent.
and I'm hoping that my kids will eventually, and they'll get it.
Promise of the word.
Promise of the word.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you know what? I think that's also very important to say, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think about my dad passed away on December 26th last year, and I sat down in his room at the care facility that he was at, and I told him, I said, Dad, I said, I just want you to think about this, that you have left a heritage.
Yep.
that, and it's being carried on.
Yes. My dad
And-
too. My dad too. The
Yeah.
same thing.
And we're carrying that on, and we're going to carry
Right.
forth that word. And you know what? I may have had that little bit of time, that little period of time where I was in rebellion, and I didn't walk according to the ways of the scripture as I was raised. But at 19, I made a change,
Right. You went back.
and I went back, and then which goes to show that teach. What's the proverb say? Teach your child the way they should go, and in the end, they'll not depart from it.
Right.
And that's pretty much, so that was me. That's my story. And so then I took what I was raised with, but then I stood on my dad's shoulders, not to go back and just live where he lived, but I stood on my dad's shoulders to take it to that next room. Because, being of my background, had nothing to do with the work of the Holy Spirit. And when I learned about the work of the Holy Spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit working in and through our lives, what's the Holy Spirit? It's the Spirit of the living God. Let's not just get that mixed up. It's Yeshua living within us in all of his power. That's the promise that was given in Acts chapter 1. Wait until you're endued with power. And so I went through that realm, and that was a huge period of time. And the fact in that time, in that period of time, was that, well, I learned how the word is more than just Old Testament stories and New Testament Jesus. It was that everything connects the dots together, and that's our walk into Torah. And so even though my dad never went to that roots of understanding Hebraic roots, he still left a legacy that I stood on the shoulder to take to the next level. And that's what our goal is, because we've all been there. We've all lived in that part.
I think we could probably, at least a lot of us, not everybody could, but go through and look at the things that our parents gave us as a legacy. I look at my mother, and it's very much spiritual legacy that has made me who I am. But my father was giving and caring, and he loved me, and he would do anything. He would always do anything in his ability to help if there was a possibility. He'd give the shirt off of his back to a stranger even. And then you look at the different people in your family, and you could, especially the parental line, and I think you could go through, we may not have been handed down riches, but we were given things maybe that are far more, would you rather have riches or faith? Faith.
Yeah, Twyla.
I was thinking of this when I was driving up this morning. And anytime I dwell on, talk to the Lord about my family, I've been kind of going through family things and looking at them lately. And she gave birth to my great-grandmother gave birth to 17 kids. But when I'm reading the papers in there, their obituaries are with the Seventh-day Adventists. The church membership is with that. Everything is that has been handed down and handed down. Now, we've changed it. It's different. It wasn't the perfect thing, just like being a Baptist wasn't the perfect thing.
Right.
But
But it gave you.
it gave me a foundation. But what I was going to say is, Mother used to say the strangest thing to me when I was just a little girl. Well, when Dad died, we were talking about prayer, and I mentioned that I had eliminated him from my prayer list, and she says, "Don't do that." And I looked at her and I says, "What?" And she says, "You don't have to pray for him because he's dead." And I got to thinking about that this morning, and I thought, if there is no time, then there is any time. And maybe we as a bunch of people and under kids need to take a moment to add that time to our prayer time. Just to say, Lord, finish doing whatever it is you were doing, because if there's no time, they can walk behind that. I guess that's weird thinking, but it was along the same
Well,
thinking.
time was created for us, this linear timeline, and Yeshua, Yah, is outside of time. In fact, that's why we can't understand we are seated in heavenly places even as we speak. Well, we don't get that because we are so bound by time. But yet, Yah is not. So how can we be seated in heavenly places and be here? Yes, as Alyssa would say, yes. And so I understand what you're saying.
I mean, I don't know. I just was talking to myself about it driving up here, and I don't know whether it's just as weird as it sounds or not.
Well, it's like praying, Father, help me fulfill the purpose of my life that you have set before me. That's what reminds me of that, because you've got a purpose. Those people started it, and it's just like a snowball. And so you want to fulfill the purpose of your life, whatever was handed down to you, I think. So that's what we need to do anyway.
That's what we try to do.
Yep. If you don't have a purpose, you don't have much,
So this next part here is, I'm gonna have to say this too. I think we should count it as a blessing, because I personally believe that when we look at our lives and we look at where we are right now, that we have this inheritance that a lot of it is in our DNA markers. Just like iniquity can put a marker on our DNA. So when we see the sins of our fathers, it marks the generations to come that deal with maybe certain iniquities. We see substance abuse and all that type of thing that comes out, anger, violence, whatever. But why not be markers in our DNA because of our inheritance? And maybe we're the only part of our family that's not a bunch of rascals, but somehow something changed and the Holy Spirit came, and then he puts a mark in our DNA. But that's the whole different thing is we have an inheritance that takes us back centuries and centuries. Maybe there was a mark in the DNA that was there, but it got so corrupted because of different people's life circumstances. But then the Father has the ability to restore us, and out of the blue, somehow our eyes are opened to see Yeshua, to see the living Word, the living Torah, the living, all these different aspects. And then our life changes. What changes? I mean, literally, we have a spiritual awakening, but it marks our very DNA with that. So again, it really comes back around to even to preserve and to protect the DNA within our body, so it's no longer corrupted, and we'll start receiving the restoration, the healing. So if we have rascals in our family, if we have corruptions within our family lineage, that somehow that gives people a proclivity, like father, like son type of thing, even to reverse those curses. And so I think, and that's just me talking, but I'm thinking, if those things are true and they've discovered those markers within DNAs that talks about the corruption of our DNA, then why not can there also the blessing that's handed down through our genetic heritage?
That's good thinking.
Yeah.
My old man was a abusive drunk for most of his life.
Uh-huh.
And the last 2 years he was alive, he changed totally. He went the other way, baptized, and I looked at that, and that's what changed my life. If anything to change that story, man, something had to be going strong.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I started in the walk.
Yeah.
Sounds like an I can only imagine sort of scenario. Have you ever seen that? It's a movie, Stephen Curtis Chapman's movie, and his dad was an abusive drunk, yeah, really bad. And towards the end of his life, he had this change, and really close to the end of his life. Sounds very similar to that.
Well, I didn't, actually, I was suspicious of it. Because you finally had nothing left to serve the devil with.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I thought, well, he's just doing it because he got nothing left.
Yeah.
But then I noticed it wasn't a joke.
Right. Tracy.
Well, my thoughts from where I come from, similar on that, as far as not having anybody in my family, how much of that actually comes back to the being able to be grafted in and be adopted, because where I got my spiritual start was a grandfather that adopted me. We were neighbors and we adopted each other. So that comes into the grafted in part, because I still don't have anybody in my local family that is a believer or any kind of, so I'm on the different one.
And when you think about the power, that right there is the power of grace. That's the power of grace, because grace is the power to overcome. It's not sloppy living and then thinking that it's all under the blood. Grace is the power to overcome all of that. And one of the aspects of grace is mercy, that God has the power to break through into our realm to bring us into that place. Yeah.
I heard a good definition of grace the other day. The time we're given to repent
The time we're given to repent.
and change.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, yeah. And if you listen to the last 2 minutes of Walking in the Spirit of Truth on Tuesday, I said, guys, it's just something to think about. According to the Deagle report, by 2025, there's going to be a huge reduction. No, I did this week. And is there going to be a huge reduction of the population of America? And everybody's like, how's that going to happen? Well,
Any sort of thing.
right now, the
The
2020 Deagle report said about a 68% reduction from 2020 to 2025. Well, we've got 1 year to 2025, and that's how they determine gross domestic product. After that, they can figure out the taxes. They'll figure out defense budgets. All that sort of stuff comes off of these analysis. Well, how do they know that there's going to be, why were they projecting that? Well, if their projections are accurate, 2024 is going to be rather interesting. So we need to make sure that we're leaving our mark. If you ever think about, it's like, I know I have so much time left. Well, we never know how much time we have. So we should really be thinking about what type of mark are we going to leave, because we need to make sure that mark is an eternal mark. But let's look at something else here in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28. It's a really good discussion. Thank you. By the way, I want to say we got Joe and Roxana online, and Eddie and Tammy, and looks like Luann and Linda are on here. So I want to say shalom, shalom. There's other people that are joining us online, and it's so good to have you guys, by the way. So let's look at Genesis 47, and starting with verse 28, just to recap it. And it says, and Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Well, that's 17 years. Isn't that kind of an interesting number? Didn't we come across 17 before in somebody's age? Joseph. Yeah, when he's wearing that robe, the royal robe. So the length of Yaakov's life was 147 years. When the days drew near that Israel must die. There we go. Now there's that drawing near. So let's talk about it. Here's some quotes. I thought this is from the Sages that kind of brings some interesting information. This is from Rabbi Joseph Sarfati in Yad Yosef. And it says, it is the nature of everything to draw near and to cleave itself to its root. So it's really interesting that you said that, Tracy, that being grafted in, putting you near to its root. So, and to cleave itself to its root and its source. For this reason, the time of death of the righteous ones is described as drawing near. So the time of death of the righteous ones is described as drawing near, as if they had a desire to return to their root and to draw themselves near to their source. So now what did Jacob want to do? What was his command? What did he tell Joseph?
Oh, to take, don't bury me.
Don't bury me
Don't
here
bury
in
me
Egypt.
Egypt. I want to go back.
Yeah, bury me with at my source, with my ancestors. Our parents and their parents before them had a great yearning to be brought near to the land of Israel, for there was the root and the source of where they were formed. So think about this. We've talked about this in regards to the greater Exodus. Now, how many, when you've heard the message of the greater Exodus, did it resonate with you?
Yes.
My word, yeah.
The greater, doesn't that,
That's really what brought Rick.
that's what brought Rick around? Yeah,
I'm pretty
okay.
sure that really did.
So why does our spirit resonate with the greater Exodus? And just for anybody that doesn't know, the word says, well, first off, next week we begin Shalom. This talks about Exodus. There was a first Exodus, and all of the 12 tribes plus a mixed multitude they leave Egypt. There's an exodus of Egypt and a process of returning to the land. The greater Exodus, according to Jeremiah, is that there will be another Exodus greater than the first. So that's why we call it the greater Exodus. That where all of the tribes that have been spread to the four corners of the earth will be gathered or regathered and restored to the land. Well, what connects us to the land of Israel? The land is a particular geographic location on the earth. When Sandy and I went there, we felt a huge connection with that land. It was just amazing. It was like, I don't want to leave here. It just feels like home. Even though there's politics and other stuff aside, I don't want to live in a socialist governmental type of society, but there's something about the land. And so this message of being restored to the land, how's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? But it's resonated with us. We always have a perspective of there's hope.
That's what I was gonna say. It gives you hope. You hear that and you've got, okay, I've got something. These people that don't believe in an afterlife, I just can't imagine. It just points to an after. There's going to be something better and bigger going on. Gives you something to look forward to.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
Not just a dark hole.
Yeah.
Nothing.
So.
Hope. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Tammy.
Well, and there's always, if you pay attention, there's a pattern of a form of Exodus throughout the Bible and even throughout history. Because you got not only out of Egypt, you got it out of Babylon, you got it out of the other one that they got taken over. But even if you go through,
Assyria?
Yeah, Syria. And then you even get into more modern day, there was an Exodus during the World War II. So there's a pattern of that.
Uh-huh. Right, there is patterns. So we got to pay attention to patterns. When something repeats more than once, for example, when there's a pattern of the destruction of the first temple followed by a pattern of the destruction of the second temple, does it tell us that there's another pattern to follow? I mean, we have to look at that. Well, what is the destruction? That's something to think about. Maybe we'll find those answers out before Ezra if you keep walking in spirit and truth with us. So that's just a shameless plug.
Well, if you look at when those temples are destroyed, there's a big deal of corruption in those temples.
Yeah, corruption. The corruption. What brought about the fall of the first one? It was because there was a pattern of corruption. What did Ezekiel see? He was brought in the spirit from Babylon to look into the temple. What was going on? They were weeping and mourning over Tammuz. In Jerusalem, at the temple. You think, no wonder it was destroyed. What about
Evidence in modern day churches today. that there's corruption in them.
So we really have to think about that. And by the way, we did not send any notes out. Sorry, because I don't send notes. It's Pastor Sandi that sends notes, by the way. So you got to write
Did
fast.
somebody ask?
Yeah,
Tammy and Eddie
Tammy and
Johnson.
Eddie from it. We didn't get the notes yet.
Yeah, that doesn't happen with John.
So-
Yeah, it's not.
You got to listen fast.
She said for us to bring last week's stuff.
Well,
last week's notes. If you didn't get last week's notes,
Last week's is supposed to be this week's too, wasn't it?
yeah, if I were you, I'd bring all my notes concerning all of time. That's me.
Hey, I do. There's a
Tammy
problem.
does.
Takes
Tammy
us
So-
5 minutes to unload and load the car. But it's worth it.
so he makes this point and it goes on. So our parents and their parents before him had a great yearning to be brought near to the land. Now this is one of the sages talking about. So he's just saying, just understand when we have these roots, we want to be brought near. And a lot of these sages, they were writing it in their diaspora, where they might have been, that there's a desire. And how many generations went by that they desired to return to the land and they couldn't. They lived and they died in the land that they were born. So, and how much of it is it that, have we said, oh, I want to survive, I want to be able to see the land. We all will be, whether we transition out of this life and move into the world to come, we're still going to have the opportunity to see that land. But in another sense, it's like, in this life, I want to see it. So the drawing near is not just a desire to, it's about the drawing near to our roots. But it also goes a little bit farther because Sarfati explains that righteous people are always eager to return to the roots, that is the source of life itself. A righteous person has no fear of death because death is simply seen as an opportunity to transfer from this world to the Olam Chabad. Now, what's this Olam Chabad mean? Chabad. Olam Chabad. Anybody? That's the world to come. So a righteous person has no fear of death. It's just an opportunity to move to the next world, the world to come. So now that's a different perspective, because as we age and we see that what is the average lifespan of an American, for example?
I'm going for 120.
You go for 120. And the average lifespan is
75 days. I don't remember.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, 75.
at one point in time. I think it got up this high for a man up to maybe 74, but I think it's down lower. I think it's
Ooh.
68 or 69 now.
Is it really?
For a woman, it's longer, maybe 74, 75.
Oh, that's not good. That's bad.
So I think about it. I just had a birthday. I mean, if I live according to the statistics, I got
Don't even go there.
about so many years left.
Getting Sandy.
Let's see you 40 years from now and some.
That's
So,
what you're,
thank you.
when you figure out you got more behind you than you have ahead of you.
Yeah, right. It's kind of that same concept as when you get the older you get and you have to go down and pick something up. You look for if you got to do anything else while you're down there.
Oh, amen.
Uh-huh.
I've had that for years.
Because you don't want to make a second trip.
That's if you can get down there.
Yeah, that mile seems like 20.
Yeah. So the root of the Hebrew for draw near is karav. I'll put it on the board. Karav. So that's the root of draw near. And it is also the root of another word. Have you ever heard this word before? Korban. Korban. Anybody heard that before?
Yes. Yeah, that's,
Where did you hear that word before?
it has to do with one of the offerings.
Yeah, so Yeshua is rebuking the people saying, oh, you're supposed to take care of your parents. And you say, well, I've taken that money that's supposed to help my parents out, and I've set it aside as Torah, as a special offering. So you can't take care of my parents because I'm going to do a special offering. So he's rebuking the how a Pharisaical teaching. Seems like sometimes there's empty promises that have been twisted, or promises that are twisted. If you want to make a korban offering, that's great, but do it not out of that reserve that's meant for taking care of parents. So the word korban is the word describing ritual sacrifices. The korban sacrifices help the Israelites draw near. Now it's this is a free will offering, a type of offering like an olah offering, and again to draw near. So there's nothing wrong with that. Just don't substitute it. Don't dig into it. So it is meant to draw near. Who are we drawing near? Why? What purpose? Because you want to kill a goat? Or is the purpose of drawing near is that we want our lives to be drawn closer and closer to the Creator? Remember that I was reading over there in Walking in the Spirit of Truth in 4 Ezra, and it was very interesting. He says, let me see if I can find it real quick. There was something that I had read. It was very interesting. Why? Why Ezra was given these visions. Oh, who was it? Okay. Maybe it was the week before. No, sorry, I don't have that reference right off the top of my head. But again, it's in that where he's told why he was given the honor to see these things. Because it was two different aspects about his heart that was revealed that in the writing there in Ezra that shows why he was qualified to see these tremendous visions. And one of the visions was also the same vision that Daniel saw with the beast. Daniel saw it as a beast with the 4 faces.
Listen to walking.
Listen to walking, right? And so. But Daniel was not given the interpretation. Ezra was taken to the next level, and he said the reason is because you've shown the true condition of your heart, which is that you mourn and you long for the temple and for the people of Israel that have been brought down and brought to ruin, and you hurt for them, you're mourning for them, you grieve for them, you want them to be restored, you want that, and so there's a longing for God's people, and that God's people will be restored. That's one of the things that's been hitting me lately, is that so many people have been with us at Life of Worship in the past, so many people that have left in the past. This is, going back when we were a Sunday church, they need to be here. They need to be here. They need to be here. They need to hear the truth. They need to connect with the truth. They need to desire the truth. People need to get over the very fact that Sandy and I both co-pastor Life of Worship. Some people have a problem with a lady teacher. And they need to get over that because there's no Jew or Greek, male or female in the kingdom. It's just we're vessels that all have the Holy Spirit working within us, that we've been all called to a particular place. And my heart is that I cry, I mourn over the people that have been with us. I see a little bit of this. I see a lot of that when I read, not in me, but in Ezra, when I'm like, man, and it's not only that, but the fact that he shows such humility when he has a vision of a woman coming out of the city. And that woman comes out of the city because she's grieving the loss of her son that she raised in her old age. And he dies the very moment that he goes into the wedding chambers after his marriage. And he dies. And that in itself, Ezra thought it was so real. He thought it was real that she came out in the field and said, I'm coming out here, I'm not going to eat anything, drink anything until I die, because my life is not worth living anymore. Did anybody grieve over a child like that before? And Ezra steps up and he says, oh, there's much more to grieve about your child. You know, you need to have more hope than that. There's more to living than that, because consider the destruction of the city, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of God's people, and the decay of all that. You need to consider that. And his heart goes out to her. And because of this, and how do we know? It's not because he's talking about his heart, is that in the telling of the story, then God speaks to him and says, your heart is in the right condition. That's why you've been shown these things. Do we grieve enough for our family and for our people? And I think even here in Jacob, he's recognizing that his time is near. And in this, he's giving the blessing to his entire family. And what has Jacob seen in all of his life? What do we see in Jacob's life? Has that guy lived as royalty? How many things went his way in his life? How many times was he faced with obstacles? There's challenges. From challenges with his brother, the challenges with the blessing, the challenges of even getting to the place to find his bride, and everything that he had was stripped from him. So he had no dowry. To getting back, and then his sons are rascals. They go and slaughter the entire city of Shechem. Then they're out going to Dothan when they should have been back in the fields of Shechem.
Did they slaughter 7 cities?
Yeah, according to Jasher, it wasn't just one. There was a lot more that they went after. But and then there's this, and then he goes to this period of he loses his son, Joseph. Then the famine comes, and it's rough. He lives a rough life. Can anybody relate to that? Probably not to the extent that Esau wanted to kill him. Had he not had those angelic confrontations, that he's like, oh, but this guy's protected. I'm not going to touch him. So he's passing on a blessing. And in the blessing, we see he's drawing near, but he wants to make sure his legacy understands that each blessing is a blessing, and that each part, everybody's part in that is so that they might have life. And that's where, if you haven't read the testimonies of the patriarchs, where it comes full circle that every one of the sons, though they were raised in the tents of Jacob, though they lived in a period of their lives that they walked away, even Judah, and all of them have these different times of ups and lows, highs and lows in their life. But in the testimony of the patriarchs, we see this, and I don't know when it was written. It could have been written during the Second Temple period, the 400 silent years. We don't really know exactly. But it goes back and it tells a picture of the story of every one of these guys, where they say, look what I did. I too was a rascal. I too had problems. I did have made bad decisions. But I'm telling you my story so you don't repeat my history. So that you will do what you need to do. And think about the impact of how each one of those sons of Jacob and how they had an impact on their children. Did all their children do the right thing? You know, living in Egypt? But how do you know that they had an impact? Oh, here we are, we're getting ready to go into Exodus. How do we know that the words of Jacob and the words of their father, Jacob's sons, had an impact? Because every one of their sons took that message and passed it down so that the tribes understand and understood that Egypt was not their home, but they were to go back to the land. And that message resonated with all 12 tribes, including Joseph's sons, who were born and raised in royalty, in the house of royalty. That their sons and their descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh, they too were all part of the Exodus. Tell me something, is that message not impactful? So this whole element, I think, with Jacob saying, and this concept of drawing near, then it's illustrated by two different things. We have two deaths in this Torah portion. We have Jacob, who says, "Don't leave my bones here, bury them at Machpelah." And that's where he and Leah's bones were laid. And then we have Joseph. And what's Joseph's message? What does he say?
Something.
Genesis chapter 50, verse 24. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but Yah will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here." So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. So, what do we know about Joseph's bones? Sorry, I'm stepping off camera.
They remained in Egypt until the Exodus.
They remained in Egypt until the Exodus. That's exactly right. And then what happened?
They took his coffin with them when they left. That's how Pharaoh knew they weren't coming back.
Yeah. So he took Joseph's bone with him. How long did it take Joseph's bones to get back to the land?
400 and something years.
Well, she's right on.
Yeah. Yeah. So, or, some say it might have been 240 years or so.
They count the 400 from the promise.
Yeah, so from the promise to the Exodus is about 400 years. And which would say there would be 200 years in the land of Egypt, and then 40 years in the wilderness. So think about this, even Joseph, in the form of his bones, spent time in the wilderness. And then they were brought, and do you know where his bones were buried?
Machpelah.
His bones were buried in Shechem. Now, I haven't figured that one out. Why were his bones buried in Shechem?
Weren't they raided a year or two ago?
Joseph's tomb is in Shechem, and I knew that there's been some controversies and some conflicts over that. Why? Because the Palestinians are actually in control of Nablus, which is ancient Shechem. Nablus, yeah. So
ISIS, I think, blew up the tomb.
they blew up the tomb.
Yeah. that sounds more like what I had read.
Yeah,
If I remember correctly, during Obama's administration, it blew up to.
I'm glad y'all remember that. It's been a long time. I forgot about that. It's sad. It's sad. It's history being destroyed.
They were doing that, it didn't matter whether it was for the history of their religion or other religions, they were wiping out any form of history.
Yeah, because they want to remove Israel's historical roots to the land. And because honestly, if you think about it, if you want a history lesson, just real quick. Palestine got its name by the Romans, so it was never a land that had its own name called Palestine until the Romans. Romans called it that because it was from what I understand, I could be wrong, but it's an adaptation that came from the Philistines. Okay? The Philistines had a small portion of land, which they were always battling up against Israel during the time of David. Goliath was a Philistine, but they were coastal traders that lived along the land of Gaza, which is Gaza today, and which they were coastal traders that came out of Phoenicia, the area that was known as Phoenicia. So they didn't even originate there. And there's a whole bunch of people trying to rewrite history about,
Everywhere.
about who they are, and that they're the original inhabitants of the land, and they're Palestinians. It's all a bunch of wordplay to cause confusion, misnaming, and all of that. Their heritage comes from the Egyptians and from the Arabs. They if you look at modern areas, Jordan, but they also have, so Egypt and Jordan, and there are some, and you say, well, they have Semitic roots. Yeah, because they do have Semitic roots, as everybody does in that area, because Abraham had more sons, right? Esau had sons. There's all sorts of Semitic roots running through that area. So, but are they all do they connect to Israel? Some do. Some were that remained in the land that were Jewish farmers and herders and that type of thing. Or leftovers from the Southern Kingdom that were still in that area that ended up under the threat of sword, converted to Islam in the 6th century and beyond. So it's such a mixture, and you can't just say we can draw lines between the people and draw up sides. But who draws sides? Who makes us draw sides?
Satan.
Government.
Yeah,
Government.
divide and conquer. Isn't that what Satan does? Democrats. Yeah, we're Democrats, Republicans. But we're seriously, we do. We draw up sides. A lot of it is inspired by the Democratic Socialist Party of America. That's a communistic Marxist design. Divide and conquer, divide and conquer. So if you feel like you're in one group pitted against another group, step out and say it's not about the two groups. It's about humanity. We need to survive this thing. And it's because we're being pitted against each other, because a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. Isn't that what Yeshua said? So, and this is what we really see with Jacob's death. He's giving these blessings to his children. He's giving the blessings to Ephraim and Manasseh. And why? Because he gathered. It's a very important word, to gather. So he's drawing near to his roots, which takes us back to drawing near to the presence of Yah. We want to draw near in this life and the world to come, but we also want to, but he's gathering. Is very important. The power of gathering is so that they will not be divided when he passes. There was something very powerful about each one getting a blessing, and they recognized it as a blessing. So, and by the way, there's nothing recorded in the word that anyone was jealous of the other's blessing.
Right.
That each one recognized that that blessing was exactly appropriate for each one. You say, but wait a minute. Simeon and Levi didn't get land. They were going to be scattered among the tribes. How is that a blessing? The other ones would have their own land, and they'd keep their tribes together. Why is that a blessing?
Less to worry about.
Because they didn't have to worry about any of the taking care of everything.
They were not equipped already.
How about a blessing in disguise? Have you ever heard of an instance where on 9/11, that certain people said, you know what, I was sick that day, or for some reason I just didn't feel like to go into work, and I didn't go into work, and the next thing I know, my office is in rubble.
Or traffic or something kept them from getting onto the train that would have had them there.
Exactly. I told that one time when I was delayed 10 minutes from getting out the door to head down 287 towards Childress, and a huge windstorm and a big pileup in the middle of that brownout from the windstorm. And I would have been right there in the middle of it. A blessing in disguise. Simeon and Levi, they were rascals. I like using that word today. Today's my word. The word of the day is rascal. Why? Because they were the ones that went into Shechem and killed all the men in the city. They devised the scheme to do this thing. And Jacob was like, dude, you got blood in your hands.
Well, he's right. You've ruined our name.
You ruined her name, all this sort of stuff. But they recognized that what was the blessing of Levi then? He was the one that his sons inherited the priesthood.
And by not owning land and having to deal with keeping up the land, they can focus on the job of being the spiritual head.
Yeah, focus on the job of being that spiritual head for them. And then, what about Simeon though? Hardly anything's ever said about him. But we do see some elements of his character that come through scriptures, that there's this violent tinge. And he recognizes that had they stayed together, would they have ended up being like a major thorn in the side for
Thugs.
all of Israel? What'd you say?
Thugs.
They've been the
Together.
thugs.
Well, and actually, there's some stuff that I've been studying on. Before I go too far, and I'm not going to say much, but because of Levi's violence, it has also something to do why the priesthood was never meant to stay there forever as a whole group. But I've got to study more out on it. But it also has to do with that violence and the blood and all of that.
Yeah.
So more study before I give you the rest of it.
And yet in Malachi, where it says that in Malachi, I think I read it's either chapter 2 or chapter 1, is that the priesthood would never leave the Levites, the Levi. Would never leave. Well, what have we learned about the priesthood in the last several weeks as we've been going through the study of the Zadokite priesthood? Is that that lineage continued all the way down through
Of that person.
And we see it connected to the first century, and we see that connected even to Yeshua's family and all of that. You see, and Yeshua carries that priesthood forward, so it's never taken away.
The
The
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
Zadok. Yeah.
Yep. So that whole connection, those 400 silent years are not silent. They reverberate with history of who we are and what we're connected to. That's why we are royalty. Royal priests. So, following in the line of the Melchizedek. Yes?
I see what she said about them having blood on their hands. Is there any flip side to that as why they are the ones to do all the sacrifices and everything and continue to have
Blood on their
blood
hands.
on their hands?
Yeah.
it would take a special person to have to do that. I agree. I think there's something in Pinchas, what he did. he had to be a warrior, or not a thug, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That would be not everybody could
The
do what he did.
mindset.
Well, I'm saying, when I said thug, I'm talking about when Simeon and Levi went in there and Shimon and Levi went in there and massacred a city, and then they ended up
That
having to do it from
propensity
city
to be
to
able
city
to-
to city.
The propensity to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I think that's. God knows
And
what
we
he's
were,
doing.
I was even talking about that with John. If there's a day and an hour where we have to, Jonathan's the one that brought it up, get there and pull that hide off that deer or something.
It's not that hard.
Killing it is one thing, but
You
then
just gotta stay
doing what
committed.
you have to do afterwards to prep it.
You just do it. You
There's-
don't
there's
think
some-
about
Or
it.
the chickens even. I mean, I know you've done chickens when you were back on the farm, but
You gotta do something.
I'm sorry, that's what I know you always told me you did, so.
No, I didn't.
Sandy.
You told me you flipped their head.
I said I took your head. I didn't say how I got it.
Sandy, before you skin that deer, you better take its muff sacks off its legs. Otherwise it ruins the meat.
I don't know anything about that. I'll have you do it. So.
You got to know anatomy to do that one, right?
Not hard.
But I mean, it's because that idea of blood. I mean, and then imagine doing
Well,
that all the
I'm
time,
thinking
day
of
in
the
and day out.
strength too, to pull a hide. Have you ever tried to peel a skin off of a fish even before
Yeah.
you cook it? It's very difficult, but I can't imagine pulling that hide off of a deer.
Or
You're gonna have
a
to have some strength.
goat, or
Yeah, well, you have to pull it
And
and
then cut it.
you
Oh,
trim it
okay.
loose.
I don't know. I just,
Yeah,
I wouldn't even know how to begin.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Once you get started, it pulls off pretty easy.
Well, and
And the
you will
strength to
have,
do this.
you will have the strength because God will give you what you need.
That's true. I hope.
He's not going to give you
well,
a,
and when
I
it's,
hope I have other
Me
people
or
around that do
somebody,
that job.
Maybe somebody
and
else.
when it comes down to survival, you got to do what you got to do, and you'll learn real fast.
What they do in Albany, where I came from, is they'll take the deer and get its legs started, and then cut a hole in the leather skin, and then put a cable on each leg, and tie the front leg like to the back of the bumper, and then
that
use a
seems
pickup,
cruel.
and it pulls the hide right off.
Yeah, but
All
in a
right.
real survival situation, you need
A
that high.
horse, yeah,
Back to the.
or a horse.
Well,
pull it off.
Okay, so
But it stays
by the
in
way,
trunk.
I bet you there's a YouTube on it.
Oh, yeah.
Not
there it
watching
is.
it.
So, okay. So going back to Levy, yeah, I really think that there's something to it because they slaughtered a lot of animals. They really did. It takes a certain stomach for that. But you also have to think about this too. One of the roles of the priesthood was to protect the tabernacle. So they had to be quite warriors, protect the temple.
And they have
Temple
both of
guard.
those.
Yeah, they're elite troops, and so that's very, very important to think about that. And Simeon, if Simeon is living among the tribes, all the other tribes, then I bet you they had a role in
Maybe
training.
he's a protector.
Yeah,
Kind of type.
yeah, they can
They
help.
were probably the military leaders.
Yeah, help train up the people. It'd be a very interesting study to look at that in
There
Scripture.
would be the, what is that?
Special forces.
No, the on the version, what is that called?
Oh, on Virgin.
Oh, yeah. The
Douglas.
Dauntless, yeah.
Dauntless.
I read all
I
three books and I've
I
seen the
love that
movies.
movie.
That's I've seen that.
Read the book, they leave a lot out that you need to know.
So, yeah, books are a lot better than movies, for sure.
Always.
That Gauntless they were pretty brave compared to the other ones.
Yeah, to the point of almost either stupid to insane in the stuff that they did. Yeah, like maybe there was a time in my life, but
Not now.
not now. My body
Did
doesn't.
we see any?
My body doesn't bounce like it used to.
You didn't see any super old people though in Dauntless.
You did?
That's
They
a
were
complete
very
rabbit
bad.
trail,
They
isn't
were
it?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
In fact, that whole movie, you don't really see any super old people. I think the oldest
didn't.
is 40-ish.
Yeah, they probably didn't let you.
When I was getting super old, I was actually counting our age and stuff. You don't see people our age.
We would be super old in that.
Well,
They would think
to
that.
the book series, I would actually recommend reading the books and not relying on the movies. Is the Divergent series and the Hunger Games. And they may be hard to, for some people, they may be hard to read, but I recommend reading them because there's things you learn in those books.
For what they're sort of a,
Like survival guide.
well, they're sort of a dictator. I mean, showing what's even
What
going on in the
I think
mindset
what
today.
happened, yes.
Tyranny,
Yeah.
yeah.
Divisions, the divisions
divisions,
sticks out to me.
manipulation,
Hit,
psychological
passion.
warfare,
Yeah.
propaganda, all of those things, sure.
Yeah.
So let's see, where are we at here?
Is that for good?
So as I was talking about earlier, Jacob therefore is, saying, I want to be buried where my ancestors are buried, but he wants his family to maintain that personal link. What would have happened if Jacob his bones were not removed from Egypt and taken back to Machpelah? Think about that. He dies there. There was an entourage that Pharaoh allowed, and all sorts of money was put into a huge amount of people caravanning all the way to the land.
Some kind of witness in that.
There's a witness in that. Yeah, for sure. But if you're taking bones back and you're part of the family, you're part of the 12 sons, and you've got your own children, and everybody's going back in this big caravan of people going to the gravesite, it will put a message into every one of them saying, though this land of Goshen is great to live in and we've been supplied during the years of famine and we've gotten through all of that, but the fact now that we live in Goshen, we still have this huge amount of provisions and all of our herds are taken care of and we have more than enough that we need. And yet, to the family, what message does that say?
We need to go back to the land.
Our roots are more important than the land we're living in. And so that's where we have to really prepare our own minds and our own hearts to the very fact that this land is not our home. When I moved to Amarillo 30 years ago, I said, I was willing to live here 2-3 years and then I'd be moving on. And here I've lived here all these different years. Couldn't get out of the place. There's another purpose for me to be here.
Well, it's like when I got my nursing degree, I looked at it as a ticket to get out of here, and I was born here.
Yeah. And
I'm
so,
still here.
and then I look at it and there's a certain amount of beauty that living in here in the high plains of Amarillo and all the canyons and all the stuff that's around here. There's a lot of beauty. If you look for it, there's lots of beauty in this area. And you can see the horizon, so you can see the storms coming. But nevertheless,
And the end.
and the enemy. And but on the other hand, I've always known it's not my home. Sandy and I've talked. Well, if we were to live somewhere else, where would we live? Well, we could picked out, maybe a couple other places where that would be a really nice place to live. It's a beautiful place and that sort of stuff. But
We've done that for years. God's never let us.
yes, God's never let us leave it. And yet on the other side of it, we still, but what is that saying? In other words, although we live here, although we have roots here, this land is not our permanent home. We know there's a permanent home. Like I said, when we went to Israel, we felt a connection with the land. Now, the people were beautiful. We love the people over there too. They were wonderful people over there. And there was just some type of connection there. Yeah, Tracy.
A lot of people don't like this comment, basically, but I wondered if that isn't why, over the years, so much nationalism, patriotism has been pushed, to not show the generations where they've come from, and so that you dig into where you
Get where you come from, you
worrying
don't
about
care.
what is to come.
That could very
That's a
well.
good thought.
Could very
Well,
well.
when they start saying, I'm Mexican American, I'm African American, I'm Asian American, you're creating division.
So the division thing we're talking about earlier, separating ourselves into groups and stuff. Yeah.
Fear soldier.
We're sojourners in this land. Yeah. We're just passing through. Yeah.
Exactly.
You know what? There was a device that I saw. It's actually relatively inexpensive, but it has it's a controller box where you can hook 2 mics up to it. Maybe we should look at something like that. That way we can have a mic for the people, and then a mic over here, and Sandy doesn't have to walk around the room.
Well, because I forget, and then when it doesn't.
Or just put a hook in the ceiling and hang it.
Oh, you wouldn't remember.
It just means you have to talk louder
Yeah.
and turn it off at the end.
All right. So that's page 1. We've talked a lot just over these little things. Where are we at in time? Let's go. A little bit of time. All right. So Genesis 47:27. 47:27. Oh yeah, so this is right before this Torah portion, but it's worth mentioning that so Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. I want to go back before we go any further with that. Did you notice something that's very interesting? When the brothers were, first off, Ephraim, Manasseh and Ephraim. Who's the older?
Vanessa.
Manasseh. Good. Ephraim's the younger. Ephraim gets the double portion. Ephraim and Manasseh are adopted by Jacob. So now that gives Jacob 13 sons. So we always talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, which is true, but there's 13 because Jacob adopted the 2 boys of Joseph. The tribe of Joseph is 2 tribes.
Would that make 14?
That'd be 13 because Joseph being one would be the part of the 12 sons. But you take Joseph out and put Ephraim and Manasseh in, then you've got 13.
Because you gotta remember, Joseph was removed from the family for so many years.
So-called adopted sort of by Pharaoh in a
Yeah.
way.
Joseph was adopted by Pharaoh in a way, yeah. So Joseph is watching his father give the blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. And he sets both of the boys down. He says on his knees. I'm thinking the boys are a little bit older than just a couple of children at this point in time. But nevertheless, they're on Jacob's knees. And what did Jacob do?
He crossed his
He
hands.
crossed his hands, and the right hand is where the main blessing goes, right? And he crosses it over for Ephraim. The other one's on Manasseh, and he gives a blessing to him. And the
Joseph
blessing,
tries to correct him before he does.
and Joseph tries to correct him. Yeah, it's like, yeah, wait a minute, you got it mixed up. And so let's look at this real quickly. Chapter 48. Then Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I'll make you a company of people, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Now, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Just right out front. Sorry, Joseph, they're mine now. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine as Reuben and Simeon are. Now, I have to ask you something. These 2 boys are being raised by Joseph, which is a good thing, right?
Mhm.
Because he's giving them their heritage, Joseph. But then, as soon as they're adopted, then what happens to the boys? Could they possibly have been removed from Joseph's house to live within the tents of Jacob?
I think that would make sense because they needed, just as Moshe needed to experience the life as a king, to act as a king, those boys needed to experience the life of a Hebrew. They'd already seen the Egyptian side. So I think it would make sense that they went to the tents of their new adopted father.
Exactly. So, because my question is, how would have Ephraim and Manasseh been so connected with the other tribes had they not been removed from the palace to go live with the tribes, to
And
live with Jacob?
Jacob wanted to also, I'm just guessing, wanted to experience raising his son whom he could never raise through his son's sons.
Yeah. And then living in the tents of Jacob would have been like living in the tents of Abraham and Shem, just like Jacob had the opportunity to live in. And living in the tents is an idiom for
Studying
Torah. I think it's really significant. And I'll tell you this, because when I've looked at some of these pseudo-apocryphal books, the apocryphal books, and where was I reading? I was reading something the other day. I don't remember exactly, but it talks about when the northern kingdom was taken into captivity to Assyria. At a certain point in time, they were released from captivity in Assyria, but they didn't necessarily go back to the land when they were released. But they went across the Euphrates and then continued to travel because they wanted to separate themselves from the pagan heathen culture that they were living in Assyria, which if you look at some of the stuff that the Assyrians did, is pretty wicked. It's really evil. Like, look at the stuff they did to their enemies, impaling them through their entire bodies and putting them on stakes at the entrance of the cities. It's like, don't mess with them. They were pretty evil people. That's why Jonah was sent to Nineveh, because they were wicked. And Nineveh was going to be destroyed, but they repented. But nevertheless, it says they went across the Euphrates to distance themselves from that culture so that they could once again begin to follow Torah. I think that's really significant. And I can't remember exactly where. As soon as I find that, I will bring it to our discussion once I find it again. But I think it's very telling because Ephraim was an alternative name for the northern kingdom. And he was given that double blessing, and ultimately was to make sure and to gather the tribes and remove them to a place of protection and safety, because there was a lesson that was learned. So they didn't go back, because that land, if you think about it, after the ending of the Assyrian empires, who came in next? If you think about your history,
Romans?
it was the Greeks. Alexander the Great.
Would it have been in the Greek apocalypse of Ezra?
I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you that. But I will say the Greeks came in. That whole area, the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid empires after Alexander died, and that area of Israel, there's the northern part. This was the Seleucids, the Ptolemaics were the southern part, which went down into Egypt. I mean, that's just a big battleground. That whole area is where it is a trade corridor, so everybody wanted to control it. And that's where the Romans came in after that, after the Greeks, and controlled that corridor. And the Romans, you ever hear about the Roman roads? You ever hear that? The Roman roads is really amazing. They went everywhere, but they were protected trade routes. And whenever there were thieves and robbers along the way, there was always a Roman garrison close by that would go and hunt them down. So they kept a free and a fairly safe trade routes from the east to the west. And so, but so what did these tribes do that were captive? They wanted to completely get out of the reach of all of these empires that were always, and they went to a land that was not populated. Now, did you ever think that the four corners of the world was not populated? That's more of a modern history. So when they went up and they moved north through the area of Armenia, through the Caucasus, over on the eastern part of the Black Sea, we've learned a lot about that area, which takes you around to southern Russia, Ukraine, where everything's named after Dan, and then you go on in through up into Europe and all into Europe. That area was not populated, except what we know about these migrations of these former 10 tribes of Israel that were once taken into captivity and then purposed themselves to get out of Assyria, but it wasn't time for them to return to the land. The Celts? Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different connections there. Yes, sir.
Just a note that St. Patrick, Catholic saint, wasn't a Catholic.
Yes.
That was nice on the.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody.
What about that on the mic, Sandy? As a drop mic.
I got it between the tables.
Mic drop. Okay.
Anyway, he wasn't a Catholic. He was a member of the Sabbath-keeping church, what they call the Celtic church.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And there's a lot that was related. Even that going back, it relates to Jeremiah the prophet. Jeremiah, who traveled after, warning the people, don't go back to Egypt, don't go down there. There's no safety there. And he survives all of the Holocaustic or the battles, all the different wars, and he survives it all. And it says that, according to history, that he traveled all the way up to Ireland. So when you go up to the British Isles, and you have Ireland, and then you have, of course, across the Channel, you got Scotland, and that's where all the Celts were, the Celtic people. So, and they were Sabbath keepers.
There were Sabbath keepers, according to what I found. And the Catholics, St. Patrick was too popular, so the Catholics took him over and made him the saint. Decided it was kept Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said that St. Patrick was so popular that the Catholics took him and decided to make him a saint.
Yeah.
Just so they could hear, because I didn't move the mic.
So, but isn't that interesting too, that there would be an inspiration of God to then remove the people in order to preserve the people? Who was it that fought against the Romans? The Romans could never defeat the barbarians. Well, who were the barbarians? And why were they called barbarians?
The Greeks said their ships were like battle. And then came out barbarian. That's where it came from.
There you go. Okay. Well, and barbarians, and but the Romans considered them as barbarians,
Yeah.
because they needed to be domesticated according to Roman ways. But the Romans can only go so far. They could never defeat the area that we know as Germany, and we see the Eastern European countries going up into. They did get into Gaul in Belgium area and Luxembourg area, but they never could get into Germany and going north into Poland and that's to the east. Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic.
Basically the Slovakian area.
Yeah, I learned is Czechia and Slovakia. It's really how it's, and then let alone going on up into Denmark and Scandinavia. So I think so we learn in our Western history, those were the barbarians. Those are the ones that the Romans could never defeat, but they were the barbarians. But guess what? The Romans could never defeat. Why? Because Israel was actually pretty strong. In fact, there are parts of England and the British Isles that the Romans could never defeat. They got in so far, and when Rome went in, and under subterfuge, they went in and even slaughtered people and villages. They come in saying, "Oh, we're going to be here for a short time, and just give us, help house us, feed us, that type of thing." And then they go in and they would slaughter the inhabitants of the village, and the people. One of the early queens of England had heard about it and said, "Wait a minute, we're not going to allow that." And they rose up an army against the Romans and destroyed them and drove them out. There's a particular wall in Great Britain that's called I think it's the Herodian Wall, and that the Romans built, and they said, "This is it. No further. We're not going any further past this line here. That's all we can defend. That's all we're going to do." Because barbarians are to the north. The Celts are to the north. Hadrian's Wall. That's it. Hadrian's Wall.
There's one further up north. I can't remember the name.
Yeah. I mean, they pushed it to that limit, but they couldn't even hold that area. So as expansive and dominating as they were, there was a whole land of people that said, "No, we're not going to be dominated." There's something in their genetics that would not allow them
To lose.
to lose again. They've been driven out before in their history, but their history got lost. But their history, by the way, in another sense, was preserved. So let's look at that real quick. I think I mentioned this in before, but these are in the heraldry of the 12 tribes, and we see that heraldry that were on the shields or on the flags. You see it on the castles and all that sort of thing. They would have it even on their armor in the medieval times. And so here's some of the heraldry, and if you see this on a flag or coat of arms, there you go. So Reuben is a man in water. And you can see this as you read through part of it. You see it in the blessings. Simeon was a sword, crossed swords, and a castle. Is that interesting? Levi was stones on the breastplate. Stones on the breastplate. Because remember the priests as the stones. Yehuda is Messiah would come through the doorway of Judah. So we have two sons of Judah, Phares and Zerah. So, or Perez. And Phares or Perez is a golden lion. And that's the lion of Yeshua. Or so the golden lion it represents the kings of England. They use that on their coat of arms. Zerah, on the other hand, is the red lion, which represents the kings of Europe. And the kings of Europe have the red lion on them. And that's kind of interesting. There's also the grapevine, a red hand, ship, and because the ship sailed to the British Isles. Castle, which is a blend with Reuben. Enlarged het, there's an enlarged het and dark flashing. So those are different things that you would see in the heraldry of Judah. Zebulun is a ship because they were traders. In fact, they actually teamed up with the Phoenicians. We talked about the Phoenicians earlier, the Philistines. But the Phoenicians, they teamed up with the Phoenicians. They're the ones that that came up with the big sea monster stories. So that if you go past that Strait of Gibraltar and into the Atlantic, you better not go there because there's sea monsters. And because of those myths and legends, it kept a lot of people from sailing across the Atlantic into the areas of North and South America where, like Brazil, which is Hebrew for iron, and then in North America where they mined copper and gold and silver and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, they wanted to keep the trade there in Israel during the time of David and Solomon. That's where they built up their riches. And so Zebulun was a big part of that, a big trading. Think about the ships that were big seafaring. They moved people as well as the supplies back and forth. Issachar. Issachar is a donkey and a burden. So it's a loaded donkey. And they would be men of husbandry. They're farmers. So Issachar, remember where it says in the scripture that Issachar understood the times and the seasons? Because they were farmers. So one, it connected them to the Moedim, and it connected them to when the planting season, the harvest season was. And if you go back and like what Pastor Sandi was talking about last week, with the different harvests, where you have the barley and the wheat, and then the wine and the oil harvests. Well, don't you think Zebulun was the one that kept everybody on track? Yeah, or I'm sorry, Issachar, right? Thank you.
I thought it was they studied the end times, and so they would know kind of the end times. That's kind of what I thought.
But isn't it?
Said. But that's interesting.
Okay, but they would know because they were that close to the earth. They were watching the constellations that helps them with the seasons. They would know and understand those things. They could read it.
Nice.
So yeah. So think about that. So in our ancestry, if we have farmers in our ancestry, there could be a connection to Issachar by chance, but not. But there was them. Dan. It also tells you what type of land they received. It was good farming, agricultural land. Dan, viper in the path. So it was like a river. So a snake-like river. How many rivers? If you look at a map of Ukraine and you look at how many rivers, all the way up through Eastern Europe, how many rivers have DN in it? Horse that goes backwards. So like it's like when it's bit by the viper, facing northward and westward. So Dan went north and west. You could all the way up to Denmark. Okay. And by the way, Dan goes all the way up to Ireland. So that's really northwest of Israel. Causing others to fall off their horses, horned snake, similar to the Danube River, and judge. That's all connected to Dan. Those are all things that you would find on the heraldry. Gad, a troop. So here's a troop. So Gad was a warrior group. Gad, or God, is how it would be said, God. It is known by a troop, so you have a soldier, and then tent. They could also be possibly the Native Americans, possibly the people living in tents. I don't know. It's been speculated that way. Asher liked the finer things of life, so they would have the container of sweets would be on their heraldry.
It said to have settled in Ireland.
To have settled in Ireland.
I've got the whole where everybody settled according to Yard divinity, the tribes, the Israelite origins of Western people, 4th edition.
And by the way, maybe they had something to do with German chocolate, which is supposed to be the best chocolate in the world.
French food. French. I'm thinking.
Numberger, Texas or something.
Huh? Anyway, that's something that it was one of those fun facts that popped up the other day that Germany has been decided to be the best tasting chocolate in the world.
The largest chocolate producer in the world.
The largest chocolate producer. That was on Amazing Race. Yeah.
I think they all know if we're going to see something, you're going to take note. It's going to
But
be.
I want to tell you this: Norwegian chocolate is really, really good too, and Swiss chocolate actually too.
No, it's German chocolate.
Not supposedly. You know, honestly, I would have to. I don't know. I'm trying to think back. You know,
Honey, it
what
was
happened?
a
What happened
long
50
time
years
ago.
ago is totally different.
Half a century.
The Hershey's chocolate's pretty good too, Josh.
How did you like it put like that?
Josh, Hershey's chocolate's
German
pretty
chocolate.
good too.
This is made out of German
Hershey's chocolate.
It's German chocolate.
That's pretty
They
good.
originally
It's
Right.
not a milk
Right.
chocolate. It's not a strawberry.
But there's a little sour tinge in Hershey's that makes it less than Norwegian chocolate or Swiss chocolate. In my opinion. All right, just saying. I'm like the big chocolate connoisseur I am. Yeah, which I'm not. Okay, Naphtali. So on their heraldry is a doe, fast, beautiful, athletic, an athletic-looking doe. So have you ever see a deer, whether it's down all four legs or up on two legs?
This has that as the Netherlands or the Norwegians actually.
Norwegians, yeah.
Naphtali.
Joseph has arrows, a bull, and a unicorn. Well, in America, by the way, what's on our crest?
Eagle
Arrows.
and arrows.
Arrows.
And it says here, it says Menashe is USA.
Arrows, bull, and what?
Arrows, bull, unicorn, fruitful bow or fruitful bow, and push north and west. So along with Dan.
No, America have the Eagles.
You know, we got a bull sitting down there on Wall Street. Benjamin, and Wall Street is like the financial hub of the world,
And they always call it a bull market.
bull market. So so think about that. Ephraim was blessed, double portion. And you see that, you know, I also pause to think and say that Babylon is destroyed in 1 hour too. So I always keep an eye on New York. Don't want to live in New York. And then Benjamin, his heraldry is a wolf. So
That's a lot of the East German,
yeah,
Germany.
Germany, Eastern Europe, yeah, they have the wolf on theirs. So now modern heraldry is probably corrupted because people don't know their history. Because you can actually go online and have pay $15 or whatever and have your own heraldry drawn up, but it's going to have nothing to do with anything that's historical in value. United States, 13 stars, 13 stripes. Remember what I said about 13 tribes?
Well, you know, when you said 13 tribes, the first thing that came to mind, because I'm a sci-fi buff, Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
And they went after the 13th tribe that came to Earth.
That's interesting.
That was the first thing that popped in my head.
13 stars, 13 stripes, stars in the shape of the Star of David. Eagles. Eagles show Dan. Eagles shows Dan.
So you got the arrows in one claw.
Yeah, you got the bow and the arrows of Manasseh are in the crest there, and then the cloud is a representation of Mount Sinai. Ireland is full of Judah. It's connected with Zorah. Remember what I said about Zorah? It's the red lion. And yeah, those are just some of the things. I think we talked about this before, but you know, it's good to kind of remind ourselves that we're connected to this history and these blessings of Jacob. And by the way, if you want to go back through, just go back through and read all of these blessings of Jacob. That's in chapter 49. And let's see. I think let's talk about should we talk about that? Shiloh. right, so let's look at Genesis 49:10. And I've got to, sorry, I got a little nose again. I know some of y'all have already dealt with this, so keep your distance. I'll keep my distance from you.
Yeah, I ended up getting sick on 24th while Sunday.
Okay. All right, so here we are. So the seed, where's the seed? Genesis 28:14 says, in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Judah's getting this blessing from Jacob. Galatians 3:16, now to Abraham and his seed, where the promise is made, he does not say, and to seeds, plural, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, who is Messiah. So that's Galatians 3:16. This seed, who is Messiah, is what Yaakov is most interested in now that he's reached the end of his life. So isn't there an understanding right there that he's connected to the Messiah? Mm-hmm. That Jacob understands the Messiah is going to come through his lineage. And the seed is the great hope for the world. And through this seed that the unity of Israel would be accomplished. And in his blessing over Yehuda, Yaakov refers to this seed as Shiloh. Has you ever heard that word Shiloh? So Shiloh, as we'd say in English in America, we'd say Shiloh. So Genesis 49:10, the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Which is very interesting. So if the Messiah is Shiloh who comes, is Shiloh who comes, he's James 4:12 says that he is the lawgiver. That if we follow Yeshua, we're going to follow the lawgiver, and we won't make excuses why we shouldn't follow his Torah, right? It's just it's very practical to me, his instructions, and not try to make excuses that it's expired for today, just, all right? But this is this prophetic speaking to us, prophetically speaking to us. Shiloh is the Messiah who shall achieve the obedience of the people. So, it's now, it is to come. Because is the world obedient to Yeshua now? Right? Of course not. Yehuda's role over the nation will last till Messiah comes, and then the nations will follow him. The result of the obedience of the people is connected with the meaning of the Hebrew root of Shiloh, which is Shalom. So let's go to that. Remember, it's all kind of talking about drawing near. The root is Shalom. And which has the meaning to enjoy rest. To enjoy rest. Matthew 11:28 says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you energy. No, I'll give you more energy to work up, to take care of those burdens, right? No, I'll give you rest. I'll give you the rest that you're looking for. Doesn't it say over there in Hebrews chapter 3, chapter 4 that they never entered into his rest? Why did they not enter into his rest? Because of unbelief. Why do people not believe that the Torah works for today? They said it expires or it's deleted or it's the past, doesn't belong to us today. Is because they do not believe. So they will not enter into his rest. And so, but Yeshua says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. There's that word. I'll give you shalah. You're going to enjoy rest. Does anybody really enjoy rest today? You don't really enjoy rest unless you stop working. So in order to know what rest really is, it means you have to work. So we work while it is still day, because night is coming, we will no longer be able to work. There's a lot of meaning in that. So we must work to fulfill the purposes by which God has called us. If all we do is nothing, we're not working. We will not, so will we even recognize rest? I don't know, just some thoughts here. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So here's another thing. Now, gematria, now everybody knows what gematria is. Every letter has a number. And so you add up all the numbers in a word, and it gives a total number. And then those numbers then can often connect us to thematic connections within Scripture. So Shiloh is 358. And there's another interesting word that also equals 358. Messiah has the same number, 358. So Shiloh then is connected to Messiah. So when Shiloh comes, what does that mean? Messiah will be here. When Messiah is here, then we'll have rest. Because Shalal, the root of that, is to enjoy rest. So the ancient scholars recognize that Shiloh spoke of Messiah. And this is in a whole bunch of different places, in the Septuagint, in the Targum, Onkelos, Yonatan, Jerusalem, the Talmud, Zohar, Bereshit, Rabbah, Yalkut. So all these different ones that the sages write, until Shiloh comes, that is King Messiah, whose is the kingdom. So modern Jewish and liberal scholars hesitate to admit that this is the reference to Messiah, because it will open up the door to the idea of a personal Messiah, as in Yeshua. Just a little bit more if y'all stay with me. So in the middle of the blessing, we have a verse that appears out of context in Genesis 49:18. I have hoped, Kavah, I have hoped for your salvation, Yeshua. I have hoped for your salvation. I have hoped for Yeshua. And at this point in time, when Jacob is saying this, there's no threat requiring deliverance or salvation. And yet he's hoping for salvation. So what's he connecting to if there's no threat from his enemies? And so being that salvation is translated as the Hebrew word is Yeshua, then it tells us that Jacob already knew something about the connection of salvation to Yeshua, the promise of salvation. He's about to die. He's about to experience salvation. He's about ready to what is salvation? Can anybody define salvation for me? Salvation encompasses a whole bunch of different things. It includes the forgiveness of sins. It includes victory over death. It includes the inheritance of eternal life, the world to come. Those were, I think we would include all those in salvation. And then it also goes on. What would have triggered Jacob to cry out at that moment? Why would he say that? Just remember what he just said about the tribe of Dan in 49:17. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that the rider shall fall backward. So, do these words, serpent, heel, and suffering, bring anything else to mind? In Genesis 3:15, I'm going through these notes kind of as a summary because I think it kind of wraps it up. I will put enmity between you, the serpent, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So that verse gives a promise of overcoming the evil one through the promised seed. The seed will suffer, for the heel is bruised. Jacob blessed Dan. He was overwhelmed with the promise of salvation, Yeshua. So the ancients understood Jacob's exclamation to reflect his longing for the Messiah. 3 times a day, based upon this passage in Genesis 40:19, observant Jews will pray with hope for the coming of your salvation.
Well, verse 18 says, I wait for your deliverance. So he was wanting to be delivered from something.
Yeah, and that's the word Yeshua.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Deliverances.
Yeah. So here's the words that they pray from blessing 15 of the Amidah. The branch of your servant David, may you speedily cause to flourish, and may you exalt in your salvation, your Yeshua. For we hope, come on, for your salvation, Yeshua. We hope for your Yeshua all the day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings forth the horn of our salvation, who brings forth the horn of Yeshua. They pray that every 3 times a day. 3 times a day they pray
we were
for
talking about
the hope of Yeshua.
of the new millennium coming. The
Yeah.
hope of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
So Orthodox Jews have a passionate longing and hope for the Messiah. So should it be said of us? I mean, honestly, do we think, well, I got the Jesus piece? How many people, in the world got the Jesus piece, but they don't have this passionate desire for his coming and live their life passionately to, like we said earlier, to draw in, to draw near, like Jacob, who lived. He lived. Though we see the passion of Jacob and Joseph in this Torah portion, it's about the world. It's about this passionate living now to draw in. Like we saw in Ezra, this passionate living for God and the purposes of God that cause us to look at not only in this realm, which allows us in this realm to have experiences that are outside of this realm, and yet the world to come. So the both are connected.
We are made to worship Him. He made us to worship Him.
He made us to worship, to draw near, to be part, be connected, and to long for the things that He longs for. What does Yeshua long for right now?
I think peace and love and
His people, His bride. He wants His bride to come to Him, to long for Him, to prepare herself for Him. Isn't that something? To be embraced by Him. And so we think, well, why are all the disturbances and the chaos in the world going on right around us right now? So His bride, like at the time of Egypt, where there was a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, would cry out and say, all right, we're done. Bring that deliverance. Return us to our land. Return us to our Messiah. Bring forth our Yeshua. Let Shalom come so that we might enjoy rest. We won't get there if we have unbelief. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt this, but we're 20 minutes into your sermon later if we don't go now.
Yeah, you need to take off. All right. Well, I love you guys. We'll see y'all later. And we're done here too as well. So let's pray. Father, we just thank you for this time that we've gathered together and we've had this time to hash out some of these things in your word. Let them reverberate within us, and so that we can understand what your heart is. And so we can live with those purposes in mind. So Father, continue to give us ears to hear and eyes to see. Help us to draw near to you. We just honor you and bless you in the mighty name of Yeshua. Amen. And for everybody, thank you for joining us online. Good to see you. I see